The tale started in an unexpected way for me. My name is Zephyr, and I'm 25 years old. I had just come back home after spending a long time living and working overseas. I left when I was 22, choosing to chase a career in a distant land. Over those 3 years, I could only stay in touch with my family through sporadic calls. This time, however, I made the decision to return to my hometown to see my family after so many days apart. When I stepped into the familiar house, a mix of comfort and unfamiliarity washed over me. My parents were deeply moved to see me again, and our entire family spent the first evening reminiscing about old times, laughing and enjoying the meals my mother had prepared, which I had missed dearly. But what struck me the most was Maurice, my younger sister. The last time I saw her, she was still a small, sweet, yet timid girl who would often hide behind me when meeting strangers. When Maris came out of her room to greet me, I could hardly believe my eyes. She had grown into a tall, confident woman. Her long hair flowed freely, her eyes sparkled, and her smile, though shy, was warm. It was a strange sensation, like meeting someone entirely new yet still familiar. "Zephyr, it's been so long since I last saw you," Maris said with a smile, her voice now carrying a maturity I hadn't expected. I pulled her into a tight hug. "When did you grow so much? I almost didn't recognize you," I teased. Maris simply chuckled, her cheeks turning pink, but she didn't say more. Throughout the evening, I found myself constantly glancing at her. Every move she made brought back old memories, but at the same time, I realized how much she had changed. There was something in the way she spoke and laughed that left me feeling puzzled. A blend of familiarity and something new, something hard to grasp. When night fell, I went to my room to rest after the long flight. My old room had been kept intact by my mother, every detail filling me with nostalgia. Exhausted, I decided to take a shower before bed. The warm water seemed to wash away all the weariness from the journey, leaving me feeling refreshed and relaxed. After drying off, I put on a loose t-shirt and lay down on the old bed, planning to take a short nap. But when the lights went out, the darkness and silence made my mind wander. Images of my family, the past, and especially Maris kept surfacing in my thoughts. I couldn't help but think about her, about how much she had changed, about the gentle yet piercing look she had given me. I tried to push these thoughts away, telling myself it was just the strangeness of seeing my sister again after so many years apart. But the more I tried to forget, the clearer her image became in my mind. I remembered how she smiled when she was shy, how she tilted her head slightly when listening to our parents talk. Every gesture, every small expression seemed etched in my memory. Lying there, I realized I was wrestling with my own emotions, but eventually, I let it all go, leaving only a gentle feeling mixed with a hint of unease and confusion in my heart. In the quiet darkness, I noticed how silent everything was. So silent that I could hear my own breathing. Yet my mind was anything but calm. I couldn't stop thinking about Maris, about how she had transformed so much in 3 years that it felt like I was meeting a completely different person. Old memories of her kept resurfacing, how she used to follow me everywhere as a child, calling out, "Brother Zephyr, wait for me." I remembered how she would hide behind me when she was scared or jump with joy when I brought her little gifts. But now Maris was no longer that little girl. Her smile, the look in her eyes, everything carried a confidence and charm I wasn't used to. I sighed softly, closing my eyes in an attempt to fall asleep, but then a gentle knock on the door made me open them. "Brother Zephyr, are you still awake?" Maris's voice came softly from the other side. I sat up, slightly surprised. "You're awake? What's up, Maris?" The door opened and Maris walked in, still wearing a simple nightgown that highlighted her slender frame. She smiled shyly and sat on the edge of the bed. "I can't sleep," she said, her hands clasped together, her eyes avoiding mine as if she were deep in thought. "I just wanted to talk to you for a bit. It's been so long since we've seen each other." I nodded, trying to keep my tone casual. "Yeah, it's been a while. What did you want to talk about?" We began with simple stories about family, work, and our lives. Maris shared about her days at home with our parents, her studies, and the small joys she had experienced. But as we talked, I noticed that her eyes sometimes seemed distant, as if there was something she couldn't bring herself to say. Brother Zeph, she suddenly stopped, her hands tightening. Do you think when two people are apart for so long, they might change so much that they don't understand each other like they used to? Her question caught me off guard. I looked at her, trying to read her expression. I think so, but if there's still a connection between them, things can go back to how they were, I replied. Maris smiled slightly, but it wasn't a fully happy smile. I hope so, she said. We sat there in the dim light, the atmosphere suddenly shifting. I could feel her closeness, the warmth of her soft breath as she sat nearby. But with it came an awkwardness I couldn't quite explain. Maris, is something wrong? Is something bothering you? I asked gently, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer immediately, just shook her head slightly. Nothing, really. I guess I'm just overthinking things. Then she stood up and smiled at me again. Okay, I'm going back to my room. I won't disturb you anymore. Good night, brother. Good night, Maris, I replied, but my mind was still filled with unanswered questions. As she stepped out and closed the door, I sat there for a moment, staring into the dark space in front of me. A strange feeling rose in my heart, both familiar and awkward, as if something had shifted between us, but I wasn't ready to confront it. I lay back on the bed but couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept drifting back to Maris, her half-closed eyes, her quiet voice as she left. There was something unusual about the way she had looked at me, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to. Time passed slowly, and the silence only deepened the unease in my heart. Finally, unable to bear the suffocation, I gave up trying to sleep. I headed to the kitchen for a drink, hoping it might calm my nerves. As I descended the stairs, the faint glow from the living room caught my attention. I paused and peeked through the slightly open door, spotting Maris on the couch. She had her legs curled up, hugging a pillow, her gaze fixed on the TV screen, though her mind seemed elsewhere. I entered quietly, not wanting to startle her. Still awake, Maris? She flinched slightly, then turned to me, her face tinged with embarrassment. I couldn't sleep, so I came down to watch some TV, she explained. I sat beside her, leaving a respectful space between us. What's wrong? You've seemed uneasy since I got back, I asked. She pressed her lips together, her eyes dropping to her clasped hands. After a moment, she shook her head. It's nothing, really. I guess it's just weird because it's been so long since you've been home. I didn't press further, but the tension between us lingered. As I studied Maris, I noticed the maturity in her features, yet there was also something fragile about her, as if she was hiding a secret she couldn't, or wouldn't, share. Trying to lighten the mood, I said, You know, when I first came back, I felt strange too. You've changed so much, it's like meeting a whole new person. Maris turned to me, her eyes widening slightly. Is change good or bad, brother? I smiled, keeping my tone light. It's good. You've grown up, become more mature, and you're really beautiful. Her cheeks flushed and she quickly looked away, though a faint smile played on her lips. Thank you, she whispered, her voice so soft I barely caught it. A long silence followed, broken only by the low hum of the TV. Then Maris spoke again, her voice hesitant. Zephyr, I have a question, but I'm afraid you'll think it's strange. I raised an eyebrow. Ask. I promise I'll answer seriously. She bit her lip, as if weighing her words, then exhaled slowly. If two people were once very close and then one of them starts feeling differently about the other, would that be wrong? Her question felt like a pinprick to the emotions I'd been trying to ignore since seeing her again. I hesitated, unsure how to respond, but her eyes were pleading for an answer. I think feelings themselves are never wrong, Maris, I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. But how we act on them is what matters. Do you understand? She nodded slightly but stayed silent, her gaze returning to the TV as if lost in thought. Seeing she didn't want to say more, I didn't push, though I couldn't ignore the way my heart raced, each beat echoing in my chest. Part of me wanted to leave, to escape the awkwardness, but another part couldn't look away from her. Finally, I stood up, trying to sound casual. Okay, I think I should head to bed. Don't stay up too late. We've got plenty of time to talk tomorrow. Maris glanced up at me and nodded. Good night, brother. Good night, Maris, I replied. But as I left the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that the peace between us was slowly being replaced by something neither of us dared to name. Back in my room, I closed the door gently, as if afraid to disturb the quiet of the house. Yet the silence only made my thoughts more chaotic. Maris's question kept replaying in my mind, spinning like an endless loop. If two people were once very close and then one starts feeling differently, is that wrong? Her words, her gaze, it all felt like an unspoken confession, one that left me anxious and unsettled. I couldn't deny that since seeing her again, I'd felt the same turmoil, though I hadn't wanted to admit it or even think about it. But now her question had brought those feelings to the surface, making them impossible to ignore. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to untangle my thoughts. But Maris's image kept appearing in my mind, her smile, her eyes, the way she'd sat beside me on the couch looking both uncertain and expectant. I tossed and turned, the tension becoming unbearable. Eventually I got up and stepped onto the balcony for some fresh air. The streetlights cast shadows on the quiet night, and the starry sky offered a small sense of calm, though it wasn't enough to quiet the chaos in my heart. As I stood there, I heard a faint sound from the stairs. Turning, I saw Maris standing there, her eyes fixed on me. I couldn't sleep, she said softly, stepping closer. I saw your door open, so I thought you might be up too. I nodded, trying to sound casual. Just came out for some air. Are you okay, Maris? She stood beside me, her hands lightly gripping the railing, her gaze on the sky. I'm fine. It's just strange having you back. There are so many emotions I don't know how to handle. I listened quietly, unsure how to respond. There was something in her voice that made it impossible to interrupt. Zephyr, she continued, her voice soft but trembling. Do you ever feel like the people closest to you can also confuse you the most? Her question felt like a knife to my deepest emotions. I turned to her eyes searching mine as if looking for answers. Maris, I began, struggling to find the right words. I think sometimes our feelings don't go the way we expect. What matters is how we handle them. Do you understand? She nodded, her eyes still locked on mine, but this time there was something different, a mix of closeness and conflict I couldn't quite define. She stood very close, her soft breath brushing against me, narrowing the already fragile space between us. My heart pounded, each beat echoing in my chest. Part of me wanted to step back, but another part couldn't look away. Maris, I said softly, my voice choked with emotion. But before I could say more, she stepped closer until there was almost no space left between us. I felt her warmth, a blend of fragility and strength, but in that moment, like a jolt pulling me back to reality, I took a step back, clinging to what little reason I had left. Maris, we can't, I said, my voice shaking, unable to meet her gaze. You're my sister. This isn't right. She looked at me, her eyes filled with emotions I couldn't decipher, but she didn't say a word. Instead, she nodded slightly, then turned and walked back into the house without a sound. I stood there watching her disappear, my heart heavy with unease and confusion. Returning to my room, I lay down on the bed, but sleep felt impossible. The tension wouldn't let me escape, and every moment of closeness between Maris and me since my return replayed in my mind. Every detail kept replaying in my mind, her shy smile when she first saw me, her meaningful questions, the way she approached me on the balcony. It all seemed to point towards something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. The next morning I woke up as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the door. My body felt heavy from a nearly sleepless night, but there was no time to dwell on it. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the kitchen reminded me that the day had already begun for everyone else. As I walked downstairs, I saw Maris by the coffee maker, preparing a pot. She was dressed in a loose t-shirt and jeans, looking casual yet still lovely. When she noticed me, she turned and offered a gentle smile, though I could see the calm in her eyes. "Good morning, brother," she said, her voice trying to sound natural. "I made coffee. Would you like a cup?" "Yes, thank you," I replied, trying to hide my admiration. I sat at the table watching her pour the coffee grounds into the filter. Her fingers moved lightly, a subtle gesture I thought only I would notice. We sat across from each other, the room quiet but filled with unspoken words. I knew she wanted to say something, and I wanted to break the silence too, but every time I opened my mouth, I couldn't find the right words. Finally, Maris spoke first. "Zephyr, I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable last night. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes but also the sadness she was trying to mask. "It's okay, Maris, it's just, I didn't know what to say either. Everything was so unexpected." She nodded, setting the coffee pot down. "I understand. Maybe I'm just confused about myself too." I didn't know how to respond. Her words felt like a confession I wasn't ready to face, but I couldn't let her feel alone in this. "Maris, listen," I began, my voice low. "We're siblings. Time and change might make things feel strange, but I believe this will pass. As long as we respect each other, everything will work out." Maris looked at me, her eyes seeming to want to say more, but she stopped herself. After a moment, she nodded slightly. "You're right. Maybe I'm just overthinking things." After breakfast, Maris avoided me for most of the day, busying herself with chores around the house, cleaning, rearranging the living room. I didn't try to approach her either, thinking we both needed time to sort through our feelings. But the distance didn't ease the tension. It only made me more restless. In the evening, my parents mentioned they were visiting a friend and wouldn't be back until later. The situation felt even more complicated now that it was just Maris and me in the house. I planned to retreat to my room early to avoid any awkwardness, but then I heard a soft knock at my door. "Maris," I called, opening the door to find her standing there, her expression calm but her eyes pleading. "Can you come out and talk to me for a moment?" she asked softly. I wanted to say no, but something in her gaze made it impossible. I nodded and followed her downstairs. We sat in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of a golden light. Maris sat on the sofa, and I kept a safe distance away. "I just wanted to explain," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want you to think I'm a stranger or that I'm trying to do something wrong. I can't control my emotions." My heart ached at her words. I wanted to interrupt to say something, but I didn't know what. "Zephyr," she continued, turning to face me, "I know what I'm feeling isn't right, but I don't know how to stop it." Her words cut deep, but they also brought to light something I'd been trying to ignore. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but how could I when I wasn't even sure of my own feelings? I looked at her, about to speak, but she stood up abruptly. "I shouldn't have brought this up. I'm sorry," she said quickly, then walked out, leaving me sitting there, overwhelmed with mixed emotions. I stayed in the living room, the soft yellow light doing little to warm the coldness settling in my chest. Maris's words, the emotions she'd revealed, and my own helplessness were building up like pressure ready to explode. I couldn't help but blame myself. How had things come to this? Part of me wanted to leave the house to escape everything so I wouldn't have to face her or my own feelings. But another part held me back, refusing to let me abandon her. I didn't want her to feel alone or rejected. I stood up and slowly climbed the stairs, stopping in front of her door. It was slightly ajar and the light from her table lamp spilled into the hallway, dim but warm. I knocked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maris, may I come in?" There was no answer, but I pushed the door open anyway. Maris was sitting on the edge of her bed, her head down, hands clasped in her lap. She didn't look up, but I knew she was aware of my presence. "Maris," I said, sitting beside her on the bed. "I don't know what to say to make you feel better, but I'm here. I want you to know you don't have to suffer alone." Maris turned to me, her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. "Zephyr, I know this is wrong, but I can't stop these feelings. I've tried, but every time I see you..." Her voice trailed off, and I felt my heart ache even more. I just can't stop thinking about you. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I knew there was nothing I could say to ease the turmoil inside her or even inside me, but I had to do something, say something to keep us from sinking further into the overwhelming emotions we were feeling. Maris, you're my sister, I said, my voice slow but firm. These feelings might be because we've been apart for so long, making everything feel unfamiliar. But it's important that we remember who we are and the roles we play in each other's lives. Maris stayed silent, just looking at me, her eyes filled with pain but also searching for a glimmer of hope. You're right, she said softly, but I don't know how to let go of this feeling, Zephyr. I just want things to go back to how they were, when I was just your little sister, and you were the big brother I've always looked up to. I placed my hand on her shoulder, a gentle but reassuring touch. I want that too, Maris, and I believe time will help you get through this. I'll be here helping you find what we once had, brotherly love, closeness, but without crossing the line we both know we can't cross. Maris nodded, leaning her head lightly on my shoulder as if seeking comfort in that moment. We sat like that for a while, neither of us speaking, just letting the quiet around us soothe the storm inside. Eventually I stood up and gave her a gentle smile. Go to sleep, Maris. Tomorrow is a new day. I believe we'll be okay. She smiled slightly, a sad but somewhat relieved smile. Good night, Zephyr. Thank you. I left her room, closing the door behind me, and felt as though I had crossed a delicate but necessary line. My emotions were still chaotic, but I knew I'd made the right choice, to hold on to what was right, even in the face of such difficult feelings. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt lighter for the first time in days. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least we had taken the first steps toward healing, for her and for myself. From this experience, I learned a profound lesson. Emotions are a natural part of being human, but how we face and handle them determines everything. Sometimes we can get caught up in conflicting emotions, especially when unexpected changes disrupt familiar dynamics. But the key is to pause, look at the situation clearly, and choose the right path. I've come to understand that love isn't just a simple feeling, it's also a responsibility, both to others and to yourself. Protecting necessary boundaries, even when it's hard, is the only way to safeguard the respect and relationships you hold dear. There will be times when you face strong, complicated emotions, even confusing ones, about yourself and the relationships around you. When that happens, remember that while emotions are natural, your actions should be guided by wisdom and moral values. Take time to understand your feelings instead of judging or acting on them impulsively. Respect the boundaries that matter in relationships because they're the foundation of trust and connection. If you ever feel lost, turn to trusted family members, friends, or listen to your heart. But always keep your values in mind. Self-control not only protects you from mistakes, but also preserves the precious relationships you cherish. My story ends here, with unforgettable lessons and a sense of relief that everything has been properly addressed and handled. Life goes on, and I believe that with sincerity and respect, we'll maintain this sacred family bond. Thank you for listening to our story. If you found it meaningful, don't forget to leave a like to show your support. See you in the next videos, and I wish everyone happiness and good health.